architectural projects that deal with space and flow of space. The last Nuit Blanche, even if I tend to stay in one zone, was becoming so impassable that the logistical aspects and the consideration of logistics probably need to have some more effort or energy placed in that area. Maybe some architects should be involved.
Let's talk about the Ryan
I'm just going to interrupt. We have an architect who's just joined the architects advisory team. So
Excellent. I was thinking about the Ryan Gander project, which was one of Sarah's projects, which for me was one of the most upsetting, disappointing, not because of Sarah. Just like how amazingly brilliant would this piece be if it wasn't surrounded by Scotiabank banners at every step of the way. I mean, that was a perfect example of how the institution and sponsorship of this event was working absolutely against the work, in my opinion.
But it wouldn't exist without that sponsorship.
I know, but we need to find, I'm not saying that we need to do away with Scotiabank. I'm thinking, moving forward, the more crowded this event gets, the more visible Scotiabank wants to be. We need to find ways to work with sponsors, with the city, with the artists together to come to some agreement on how these things function together.
One point about that was pretty incredible is of all the projects I had, at every point I thought there's one that they're going to cancel on me. And when we needed to do a giant bonfire in the little Yonge and Dundas Square, I thought for sure that was going to be the one that wasn't going to make it. I mean, I think we actually had to pass something through City Hall to even have the scale of bonfire that we had. And God knows that I can't pick up the phone for any Mercer Union project and ask if I can have a bonfire that lasts 12 hours in the Yonge and Dundas. But yeah, questions of scale and an understanding of the visual culture of the street. Yes, the signage is overwhelming in relation to the work sometimes, and these are important questions. And the question of scale is significant in artworks, always in looking at artworks. And I think that was also a learning point for me. I was like, how could I know how large a fire would really be required in order to animate Yonge and Dundas Square? But the thing that I thought would be really nice is if we had turned off all the illuminated billboards, but that cost way more than you'd ever imagine. You'd have to buy out every single advertiser, and there'd always be one holdout who was like, great, the other 50 said that you could do this? I'm going to turn the lights up on mine. But, so yeah, I mean, that's something to acknowledge is there is incredible potential there. There's some things that you can activate that otherwise as a curator I don't have access to. And that project held that. And then it did operate, you had to find the fire, which was kind of funny because actually the press really, when they were doing the surveys of like, exciting things that are happening, because the notion of explosions and fire or anything like that is sort of, that's easy to write a sentence about. So much of the press was interested in this Ryan Gander piece, and they noted it everywhere, like it was going to be like super visible and like a marker that you'd be able to find. And so it was actually sort of amusing, but this is one of these points, curatorial, that is interesting, where something positioned a way that you didn't imagine actually also works differently. So, no. I totally believe in productive failure, but in this case, it was actually the intimacy of the scale of, like, it was two men's labor to chop that wood and burn it all night long. And when you approached it, it really was like you walked away, your clothing smelled of firewood. And I would say that a lot of good experiences in Nuit Blanche for me are when you stumble into something that like is a little bit off the beaten track, and you have to find yourself, and it's not immediately available, and it's not grandiose. There's still that potential. You're going to have these experiences that are divorced from the general hoopla type thing.
I think the fact of the matter is that at least from my critical perspective, the most successful projects at Nuit Blanche so far have been ones that contend directly with the circumstances, however woeful, of the event. Like, your project is different than what you normally do. Like, I feel like there's a big backstory to how you devised and strategized your project in order to make it crowd-related and successful in that sense. John Sazaki's project is another that to me is memorable as an important artwork in John's career, which is something that, you know, to go back to what we were saying originally, what Kim was saying about documentation, that we can't say about a lot of projects. But that was so space specific, and I just haven't really. I haven't had a lot of. And the more that the event goes on, and I get the press pass, like the more I have kind of a skewed notion of like what it's like to actually be somebody like on the ground. Like, I got into the Jeffrey Farmer piece late at night, and it was magical for me, but I imagine a lot of people didn't get into that. And similarly, like, I got into the piece by the artist whose name I can't remember, which was in the Ghost Station at Bay Street last fall, which was, Julie and I have talked about this. There are a lot of, there's a lot of context there, but suffice it to say that it was not, it was really anticlimactic. I thought actually that when I wrote about this, but I thought actually that when we got down there that there was going to be a riot, because people had been standing in line for so long, and I felt very guilty that I just waltzed in. But yeah, I'd like to hear from you guys, if you don't mind, like how you devised the project. It seems to me that you did.
When we were planning the project, we were definitely thinking of the audience, of the spectacle that is Nuit Blanche, and you know, wanted to incorporate the audience as part of our installation. So Event Horizon wasn't a finished or completed piece until the audience became part of it, and for us it was amazing to see throughout the night the crowds gather, and parts of the installation that we didn't necessarily consider the focus actually attracted more attention than other areas.
Describe it briefly, maybe, for those who don't know.
Yeah, alien crash landing, like fire trucks, ambulances, extras in containment suits, military, police. Yeah, we had like this great group of people who were acting in the scene, and then a sort of a line, but the lineup was, like, we were designing the lineup, so whereas people had a lineup to get into the subway, we were thinking our lineup would have significance because they were lining up to see what would be a line in state, but the line in state is that E.T. and Yoda, so E.T.
But your line just like flowed, it just kept flowing.
Yeah, because we were concerned about that too, because I had been involved in show production.
We were
so
told to move along.
it was free to go. See, I've been involved in show production. We had thought tremendously about logistics the whole time, but other works since then have taken that cue. So John's work, right? We found out about a couple of artists who are doing an upcoming project, which sounds really, really exciting for this next iteration of Nuit Blanche that involves the crowd. And then there's kind of an art form that is arising out of Nuit Blanche, of this idea of reenactments, of how to treat spectacle and how to respond to it. There's other ones that are much more, involve sort of smaller experiences of discovery or dreamlike scenarios that are much more intimate or play to people's emotions in a different way. But definitely we were thinking about spectacle, the logistics of the crowd, involving the crowd as a reflection of Nuit Blanche in a metaphorical sense, and of course that idea of spectacle and henceforth disaster, but then tied in a mass media sense, and that the mythology that everyone would hold is some sort of a mass media reference. Hence, like, the way the crowd in some abstract sense, holds some kind of commonality amongst it. Yeah, so we were thinking about those things.
I might just ask one more question, and we can put things to the audience. I guess the question actually comes from David from earlier this afternoon, to do with the international artists that from time to time get brought in, and these marquee names that get thrown into the mix, like Biennial, Lenoir? Yeah. So for instance, you know,
Jim Hamilton.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. Jeff Koons, there's a better example.
Never heard of him.
The big city of Hamilton. Anyway. So the idea here being that local artists are mingling with, in some cases, international artists to give Torontonians the prestige they deserve or some such thing. But does the event really need those big names to be successful, and are they attractions or detractions?
It's funny because Jen and I talked a lot about this. We didn't know if this was going to come up in the discussion. It's such a complex scenario, and then you know, a few of us are also artists on the panel. It's important to loan profile to the event, but it's also, it's important to speak to other cities or other locales and to import artists. The artists that are brought in, I don't think they have any more resources afforded to them than the artists in Toronto. So, that would be a first thing, that if somebody had an issue with it, it would be really unfortunate. And that sometimes happens in our institutions in Toronto. And that's a really unfortunate trend that upsets us as artists, where foreign artists are brought in, all the resources go to the foreign artists, and then, put crazy old grandma up on the second floor there, in the Canadian component of the show. Oh, they hold on.
Just to not like if you bring in an artist in from Holland, for example, you can draw from so many, like it might not all come from the institution.
And then the counterpoint, I just want to finish the point. This is what Jen and I were discussing earlier today, is that we really hope that the export aspect could somehow be improved. So that the artists from Toronto get shared in other Nuit Blanche, and I know this happens somewhat, but I don't think it's like all that prevalent. And so that Toronto needs to also work on its cultural exports. So we do a lot of importing in, but Toronto artists need to have more opportunities to share their ideas, because I think Toronto artists are great and should do that.
There are certainly many Toronto artists featured in Nuit Blanche, though.
Oh, there
Right.
was. Whoa, I didn't see it.
But on this point about resources, it's also, I think it's very important for us to be hosting international artists in Toronto as part of the trade, actually. And I think one of the ways that you become more part of the culture of exhibitions at large is to be outward looking, and I think sometimes we are responsible for the situation in which we know how much we should be in that sphere, and we feel under-recognized, but it makes us bad hosts sometimes. And we feel hard done by that, we're not participating in that sphere, but we have to just challenge ourselves to think we actually are part of that sphere already. And the programming that we do is noted, and it doesn't have to be just noted in local press, it can be noted in international press as well, if we treat it on the same standing. I think sometimes we can suffer a little bit of regionalism.
I agree. I don't know if you think I was talking that way, though, like I was representing a regional perspective. I was not. Another thing that we talked about was the notion that how many people from outside of Canada want to come and see Nuit Blanche in Toronto, and that it would be interesting if we focused on that factor, and what can we do to make people from more than just the GTA want to come in?
I just like to put it out there that I find that, I'm all for internationalism and the parochial aspect of Canada's art scene drives me crazy. But there is a sense with some of the projects, like with big name artists who are names, who are like brands, there's a coldness to those works that you don't get from somebody who's a local, who's been given a chance. And I'm not saying that there's more money allocated to it, because there's not. It's just there's a sense that there's a perfunctory sense to it that I don't like. I think we could be doing it better.
I would agree. I feel like sometimes you get the big name artists in and you get their D-list ideas. You know, like I was excited to have Santiago Sierra come take part until I found he was going to drive a truck around that said no on the back. Not his best idea.
I just wanted to follow up to your first comment, and just to say that yeah, it's really important to have that exchange start to happen. And I think that there are a lot more resources you can look to when you're bringing artists in from certain countries because of where contemporary art stands in terms of their priorities of what they fund. And so I do feel like Nuit Blanche has the potential to try to elevate the place of contemporary art in a larger consciousness. And that's, you know, because it's not going to be, it's a very complex issue, right? How to get the funds be allocated to Canadian artists, let's say, to go abroad and bring Canadian art out into the world in the same way that we try to do it from within, taking it out and bringing it in. But it's a really difficult thing when we're trying to tap into our cultural funding. And it's really unstable, right? So when a program exists for a little while and a platform changes, then it's gone, and it's very hard to build on that shifting basis. So I'm totally in agreement with you there that you know, along with, or just to put it up there in terms of one of the priorities of getting behind this thing and trying to think of what more it can do beyond our streets, right?
Maybe it needs to have a biennial added to it.
We need to export money for work, and the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade used to have programs that don't exist anymore. And that's part of the equation of how to be dealing in the international sphere. It's also being present in this place takes infrastructure.
I think everybody would agree that we want to see Toronto exported more, but I can't imagine the model in which Nuit Blanche would be the organization to do that. Well, like, it's not like are we going to trade with some Paris artists?
But didn't the question arise or did I raise that question? But the issue of import, I mean, that's what Scott was talking about. Of course we should import culture and great ideas. But it did raise the question of export. I was just saying that, you know, as a response to what we were talking about, we said, well, yeah, maybe Nuit Blanche isn't the best place for that export. But on the other hand, I'm sure that Jen can answer to, because I'm sure we talked about it to some extent, and it was somewhere cooking on the back burner.
We've been at the table with Paris, Brussels, Rome, etc., and we're sort of like honorary members of the European network, and basically they sat there kind of discussed amongst themselves, and they said, yes, Toronto can join us. And part of what we brought to the table was that we want to pitch them Toronto artists. So every year, basically, we have their ear, but we don't have the funding yet to also say, here's the $50,000 to go to make this project happen. It's happened once. I think one of the projects from Clara Hargitay's exhibition did get picked up.
And
so
Michelle did the giant disco ball at the same time, and he did that in Paris as part of Nuit Blanche. So,
like every city is going to have this concern. It's not like you know New York's thinking, well, at least we sent Jeff Koons.
I think that
They didn't send Jeff Koons, just a rabbit.
if you're taking it from a totalizing culture building perspective, maybe the question should arise, and I mean the question had arisen. Say Jen had spoken about it. And that integration, and Dave, I mean, of course I see your perspective. It's not the best cultural export platform, but it definitely is one that could raise some awareness about particular artists and their project in other cities. Like, it's a nice way to parachute into Paris, with a gigantic project and, I don't know, 500,000 people seeing it. So I think it was good for Michelle.
The other thing besides kind of basic institutional infrastructure for export is word of mouth, international word of mouth. This is one of the things that I've noticed having been at TPW for a number of years, and the effort that we put into bringing international artists, and we're noticing the payoff in terms of people getting in touch from other countries saying, I heard about the project so-and-so did with you, they had a really good experience, what else is going on, how can I get involved? I mean, that's happened numerous times, and usually that happens not with the really super senior artists who send their rabbit and don't show up themselves, but it happens with the kind of mid-career artists who are still kind of engaging at the level of people and want to come. So, I mean, that's another strategy for the sort of like bigger ticket international work would be to not have the sort of blockbuster name, but to still have somebody established, particularly around kind of social practice work, which, when you're bringing somebody in from elsewhere, you really need to have a kind of 2-year development process, and you need to have the budget to have them come and engage with the city and find their way and how they want to engage with the city. Otherwise, you are going to get the, what a bummer that's here.
Well, but just quickly too, I mean,
rip-off.
if you put money into export, it also might raise the stakes for Toronto, so that Santiago Cerro, when he comes, has to do, a work that's groundbreaking for his practice.
Or maybe he should have been asked 5 years ago to do a project for 5 years from now and come every year and do research.
Yeah, timelines are tougher because you don't necessarily find out until pretty close to the date. I think that maybe Nuit Blanche is starting to leapfrog years in terms of that.
Not in terms of execution, but in terms of planning. We're getting there on a longer cycle.
So maybe that leapfrogging would be good. And also, like last year, there was some taking stock. So the show that Fern Bear did, some panel discussions, but the cultural effect, it is supposed to be a fleeting, like momentary type event, but some of that exchange of people's ideas and time to associate with each other, except for like the night up would be a good thing in terms of some sort of cultural cohesiveness or exchange.
I would like to open things up to the audience at this point, if there are questions or comments that anybody has. Yeah.
I'm going to know any one of you think about off-the-radar events that, an artist doesn't plan to be in a section, but decides to actually do something in the spirit of this night of art and this night of amazingness. Do you think that is good or bad? Like, or your thoughts on being left
I think it's both of those things, I think, depending on who the artist is. Like, sometimes it's just a busker who thinks, like, there's a lot of people who are going to be in the street, I'm going to get some of their corners. And sometimes it's someone who has this great idea, like, straps a video camera to his bike and projects along the walls as he drives, and it's kind of great. I think that's the nature of it, right? That you just get a bit of both. And I think Nuit Blanche is open to that.
What would you count as 3 strongest criticisms on Nuit Blanche? 3 words.
Well, I think we reiterated that some people are concerned about the corporate sponsorship, some people are concerned about logistics and crowds. Is there a third major one?
I'd say artworks that involve Twitter.
People started to say, that there's a pressure on artist practice, essentially, that for, even in many ways, but for younger artists who are starting and who don't see a way to, to gain some momentum with their practice and who work in a much more maybe subtle and quiet way than Nuit Blanche would afford, will then change their practice. I mean, I don't know that I feel that way, but I've heard a lot of people saying that there's an undue kind of pressure on people to work in a spectacular way.
I decided I hadn't said enough about the corporate issue. I just want to clarify what my problem is, and that is that there is no real space for discussion in Toronto about what the productive models of the kind of relationship between the corporate and the cultural community can be. I'm worried about the direction it's going. I'm worried we're going to end up with a sign that says welcome to Scotiabank, Metropolitan Toronto.
Joke on 30 Rock.
No, they did.
Scotiabank Toronto.
I'm worried that, all of our events are starting to look the same And it's not to say that that money isn't super appreciated, but I think there needs to be more space for open discussion and somebody to facilitate that discussion without the fear of losing that money. I mean, maybe sometimes we need to lose the money if the situation isn't right, but it's pervasive across a number of situations in Toronto, and there are a lot of people who are moving to Toronto, particularly from Vancouver in the last 2 years, who are commenting on a regular basis how overwhelmed and how specific this relationship between sort of corporate and culture is in Toronto. That they haven't with it. Actually, they're afraid. They're kind of confused, and they also feel like they can't talk about it publicly because, well, I'm telling you the feedback I'm getting. No, what I'm saying is we don't need to be afraid, and it would be, again, we have these people, I trust this team is a team that is, working on the artist's behalf, in our best interest, but they're also, they are working hard. I know that they're working hard in those negotiations with corporate sector, and there are some pretty heavy expectations from the corporate sector.
It's funny, but because the last panel, we were saying, but now we have this unfriendly mayor, and it could just get cut because it's considered a frivolous expense in terms of use of taxpayers' money. So
now it doesn't matter if Ford cuts the money because the budget is 70% corporate, 30% city, which is the reverse of what it was when I curated.
In order to justify it, I think that's the direction that they're going. I mean, it's better to have it than not. Definitely recognize.
Does that mean we can't have a decent conversation about it and really work together?
Where would the forum? Where would the forum be? That would be great.
Julian, where would the forum be?
It happens every day in our office. That discussion is every single day.
How big the office is?
Anyone is welcome to see my cubby hole without windows in City Hall any day of the week. You're welcome to drop by.
Listen, I'm fixing work in my room. Every day.
Yeah, it's a small. We run. Our team are fantastic. We do. Just to put us in context, we over the years have learned a lot of different languages in terms of event production. We do Cavalcade of Lights, welcoming the holiday season, we program music on Canada Day.
Is there anybody here from the development side of the team right now?
No, but a large part of that role...
We'll see them tomorrow, though.
We'll see them tomorrow, and we'll be nagging them. We always are nagging them. We're always trying to position the artist to the sponsor. But this is a culture of North America. Tell my English accent. I come from Britain, and most recently I was in... Oslo on a completely other matter, and I went to the new Oslo Opera House. Fantastic evening, and I went, where's the sponsor's name on this? Having worked for 4 seasons, the opera company where everyone is sponsored down to the door handle in the opera company. In Oslo, the taxpayers had a levy imposed on them as a nation of 6 million people to build an opera house because the country thought that was a good thing. There is no Mercedes-Benz Opera House door, there is no in our Gunnarson, auditorium. The taxpayer paid for it. That is not the psyche of Canada. I'm sorry, guys, that's the nation we live in. However, I think it's a fantastic city to live in. I enjoy living in Toronto, and what we all achieve by working together is really brilliant. And yeah, we do, honestly, trust me, we rattle the cages of...
From another point of view.
We rattle the cages of those corporate sponsors every single meeting we have with them.
Yeah, but we can't say that there's nothing that can be done actually in this beautiful country, Northern America kind of continent. I mean, we're human beings, right? We need culture. And this is the way how, we breathe. We need a good dental plan and as well excellent galleries, excellent opera.
Coming to Canada is all about good health, good culture, good education.
For it,
absolutely.
Not saying that, that's what we're going to do.
You know what, I actually want to address what you were saying, Kim, about this sort of fear that people have of discussing the elephant in the room. And I think that's a fear of what? I don't understand it. Express it. If it's something that's an issue, you say, look, you know what? We need more spectacle about the artist and less spectacle about the corporation that's supporting it.
And what if they say no, and we won't
We'll say,
give
you know
money?
what?
That's what people are afraid of.
Why be afraid of it, though? Why be afraid of it? That's the thing. If you really and truly believe it, then you have to be willing to go to the end of the road and say, if we lose it, we lose it, but we have to say something. You know, like, seriously, if you want something to happen, you can't have it both ways. You cannot have it both ways. You can't say, well, we don't want to disturb the corporate sponsor, so we won't say anything. When the whole time you're going, fuck all this energy that's going into, hating this corporate sponsorship.
Yeah,
It's a problem.
I don't think it's a matter of anyone being taciturn, though. I think it's a matter, I think it's
what
a matter
Tim
of
was
fighting the
saying.
whole way through, and a lot of compromise. I think
Did
that
we really think that when Jeff Koons was going to send his bunny that he was going to show up and talk to the people? I mean, really?
That's another issue.
Well, no, but it's the whole issue. It's the whole issue of expectation versus the structure that we're setting up for it, right?
I'm saying, I think that you're totally right in voicing your opinion. I totally agree with you. I'm just saying that we have to face the fact that the arts are incredibly, obscenely underfunded in this country. That most people vote, like, look at the voting patterns over the past 10 years. People do not want to pay taxes. They don't want to. They don't want their money going to the arts. So what we're having is this porn luck with corporations, and all I'm saying is that the people who are on, I mean, maybe Kim knows better than I do, but I think the people who are part of those arts organizations are trying their very, very best, and that the people who do have the money can be absolute bastards and can try to voice their agenda in everywhere.
And what I would suggest...
I'm just saying that it's a struggle.
Yes, it is a struggle.
People aren't like just going, okay.
I understand it's a struggle. I'm an artist, I'm a curator, I'm an educator. You think I don't know struggle? I stood out on the strike lines at York University for 3 months. So, struggle, I understand struggle. But at some point, there has to be a line that you cross where you say, and you say that we are underfunded. I think that the arts in Canada, if anything, are extremely well funded, but they've been funded a certain way and that funding is shifting. So we're in a state of transition, and what do we do at that state of transition? We can't hold on to what we had. We don't know what's coming in the future. We're in this position where, there's conflict, and it has to be resolved. And I don't think that by being silent is not the way to resolve it. It's difficult.
What are some of your suggestions?
Well, my suggestion is what I do. I mean, I can only go by what I do, is take the risk. You might lose it. I've lost things because I made the risk. I put myself out there and said, this is what needs to happen for me. It's not happening for me. I guess it's not going to work out.
What is the City of Toronto people like? What would be some consequences that you might face by saying no to some signage? Like, can you speak to that?
It is. Let's be brutally honest. It's marketing and branding, man. We're a short-term event. We're run by the City of Toronto. We're virtually ineligible for. We're not going after private foundations. We're not going after individual philanthropy money. There is no longevity about the event where Sir William Houdar or whatever is, attached to a building, or in Britain, lots of people give money to get an OBE token, as we would call it, or maybe here it's an Order of Canada token. That is not a possibility. It's not a realm that we can really explore in the nature of what Nuit Blanche is here in Toronto.
But there's no negotiation.
Negotiation every single day with those sponsors.
I understand, but we like, because you mentioned that a million people came out.
It's about content.
This is the market, right?
Yep.
From the business point of view, if you have 1 million people out, okay, you don't really have to cover them with the logos everywhere.
Unfortunately, you do. We moderate that and we mitigate that, but you can't walk away completely from that.
No, I'm just saying that that's necessary, but I'm saying that too much is actually wrongdoing.
And frankly speaking, the visitors don't care really if they're looking at a spectacular piece of art. They don't care where the bloody banner is. And we are fixing so many things, and artists have to transcend that particular limitation which is necessary. Move on and further up. Yes, the signage does pose problem, but it doesn't stop the work from becoming spectacular.
Yes.
Yes, it
does.
Yes, it does.
Issue, which I do actually think is probably the right standard, that the corporate negotiation does have an impact on the actual content, what gets shown, how it gets shown, the meaning that is produced by the work, and that is another negotiation that I know for a fact happens on a regular basis.
Yes.
So
maybe then that is the place where you take the stand and you say,
this is not to say we walk away, this is to say say, can we find, what are the more productive models for having that conversation?
And I think that we're re-looking at those every single year, that we're also trying to say, how can we also connect these sponsors with an artist, and artists who are open to that, because some artists also are not, and which is totally understandable. At the same time, we're trying to, take some of that corporate money and go, you know what, let's put a few, some of it where you need your logos and your branding, and let's put a bunch of it over to make the work happen. It's going directly to the artwork. And we don't have conversations about what is the art or anything like that with the sponsors there. That's a non-starter, but it's a constant negotiation and it's different with every sponsor depending on what their agenda is when they come in. And yeah, it's a daily struggle, but we're not laying down, it's a relationship that changes every time.
Conversation about what the art is in relation to the sponsor is also a type of pedagogy, and I would say one of the interesting things within the city too is that the development department isn't just responsible for looking after money for Nuit Blanche, right? They have a whole host of portfolio. There is an exercise of responsibility there amongst the development department to be familiar with the work and to hone that information such that they actually become a go-to person about the work also. I think that's a responsibility we have to carry as curators, to defer to that, and also to not just sort of be pandering to sponsors. And I think actually, if you're really well informed about the work, it puts you in a better position not to make promises that destroy the work or negate it, right?
And I just have one thing to, because with the Nuit Blanche, what I really missed, I'm so shocked with that million people. And the very strange thing is that actually there's not much on TV about that.
We've actually,
I was thinking about,
we have a page.
Just a second.
300,000.
The TV is a huge vehicle.
Well,
there's a well computer on that stuff. So who knows? Maybe it would be a good idea to negotiate with these big banks for them to buy time on TV, and then put these logos, whatever, and cover as well some of the best projects from the Nuit Blanche, and that would go to the States. That would go to everywhere. Come on, why not?
I don't know.
And then we're not looking for 1 million
an hour's
people.
worth of our television is about $300,000 to produce, assuming